This is the Final Word podcast, and I'm excited that we have an absolutely incredible preacher, scholar, thought leader, organizer with us this evening, none other than Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes. He just finished preaching here at Trinity for the Mission Revival, an amazing message that I hope that you will have the opportunity to listen to and allow it just to wash over your spirit. Makes me want to holler. And Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, a graduate of Bishop College, also the pastor of the Friendship West Baptist Church. He's done incredible work at Friendship West, where he has expanded that ministry to a few hundred to now over 10,000 members, probably even larger if you add in the virtual community. What is unique about Dr. Haynes is that Dr. Haynes has a prophetic message. A message that is committed to social justice, a message that lifts up the power of the prophet. He is a priest, meaning that he is speaking to God on behalf of the people, but he is also a prophet, speaking to God, speaking to the people on behalf of God. And so we're delighted that none other than Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes is with us for the final word. Dr. Haynes, thank you so much for being with us tonight, man.
I am honored. Thank you.
Man, it is a blessing to have you. You preached a mighty word tonight, and I just have a couple of questions for you. Or let me put it this way. What is your inspiration for the style of preaching that you present? You have a unique way of communicating, and it merges, I would say, it's a little bit of California, it's a little bit of Southern. At the same time, you were dipped in the waters of Bishop, which for those who may not know, probably there is no other school that has ever existed that has produced as many preachers as Bishop College produced.
Yeah. And I really appreciate your question. I must also say that as much as I want to give props to Bishop, Morehouse done picked up where Bishop left off, because I'm sitting in front of one of the great preachers of the world. Just ask Union Chapel.
Oh, Lord.
Very seriously, I think it's a combination, number one, and in reflection, because I didn't think about this until recently, I'm basically a 70s kid.
Mm-hmm.
In the 70s, hip-hop was starting, and there's a rapid-fire approach to delivery that I have. And ironically, when I first started preaching, I was told by a Morehouse man, Amos Brown, here's what you do. You go slow, rise high, strike fire, sit down in the storm. Your dad does it perfectly. And of course, I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I took off immediately. And he said, go slow, rise high, strike fire, sit down in the storm. And so finally, I'm in a revival over in Gary, Indiana, a revival, a simultaneous revival. All these preachers are preaching. Ralph West, Bishop College classmate, he preaches, wrecks the house. He goes slow, rises high, strikes fire, storm is raging. Afterwards, I say, Ralph, I want to know how to do that. How do you deliberately speak so slow? And Ralph gave me these words. He said, Fred, why would you, who talks fast normally, want to get up and preach slow? He said, preaching truth through personality, according to a great preacher of the past, he said, your personality is rapid fire. And people respond to your rapid fire personality. That night, after Ralph said that, a kid comes up to me, probably 15 years old. I love the way you preach because you rap. And so I put all that together, and Doc, I just started to feel at home with my personality coming through my preaching. And so your observation is crazy, because there's some California, without question. There's some Southern flavor. Texas got a hold of me. But then I've got to really give credit to hip hop for freeing me up to say it's okay to talk fast. And once I felt that freedom and the fact that there was a listening audience that was coming up with me that basically was used to listening to a more rapid fire pace. And man, after that, I'd never tried. I mean, I was trying to talk like King and nothing worked. My dad talked slow. My grandfather was slow paced. And then here I come, and I'm feeling like I'm not doing this right. And then God, through those conversations and confirmation, let me know that my personality was what God wanted to use to reach whoever God wanted to reach through me.
But your cadence is Bay Area cadence. There's a flavor in terms of how you communicate because Bay Area rappers, Bay Area poets, and Bay Area musicians have a particular staccato way in which they communicate.
Yes. And so I was listening to E40 about 5 or 6 years ago, and my nephew, who has done some podcast with E40, was telling me, I want you to hear E40 because you remind me of E40.
Yes,
and I hadn't even thought about that.
I could definitely see that. Yes,
yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. And so again, that Yay area is really a strong part of who I am.
Now, what you just said, this just hit me. So here you are, Bay Area, Texas, but the migration pattern was Texas to Bay Area. So all of a sudden, you are bringing together the two elements of the way that people communicate in the space and where you are pastoring.
Yeah. So it's really strange. As you said, I'm kind of the reverse migration.
Right.
Because my parents moved from Dallas to San Francisco.
Did they?
Yeah, so I was born in Dallas,
okay.
and at 2, they moved to San Francisco. So I've reversed it, as it were. It's almost a full circle, one could say. And so, again, I can't deny the fact that growing up, I mean, if I'm honest, my origins in terms of oratory, it happened in the Bay Area. So all of that influence was around me. And then, I'm admitting this now, but I would have been afraid to admit it, all those years ago. I'd sneak away to go hear Huey Newton because the Panthers were blessing me because they were making me feel good about who I am and doing the work in the community. Huey talked.
I was about to say, the speed of Huey Newton was radically different than hearing a king speak.
Yes, yes. And again, I don't always admit this, but Huey at that age, I mean, he was it for me. And, I'm feeling Martin, but Huey is doing it for me because I'm feeling the message, but I'm loving the style. Yeah.
Now, what kind of preacher was your father?
Wow. So my dad, and again, he loved, admired his dad. When I think of you and your father, I think of my father and his dad. Because he had that kind of time with him. He was 40. When his father passed, I think he was 43, 42. But he revered his father. And so I began by saying that he was very much like his dad.
Okay.
In that his dad was socially conscious and in that Martin King kind of tradition. When I listen to my dad's tapes, I mean, it's the same cadence, the same, go slow, rise high, strike. I mean, that was my dad. And again, the poetry infused flavoring so that the metaphors, the similes, the analogies, I mean, the flowery language, my dad loved that. I could recite to this day some phrases that I got from him as a kid because I just liked, we used to say when I was coming up, do you see what I'm saying? I could see what he was saying because he was so flowery with his language, but he got that from his dad. And so I'm really blessed. I was 14 when he died, but I remember sitting in church because I just loved him. I was just into him. And okay, he preached. And so I said, well, I might as well like what he does because he's a preacher. And I would just be mesmerized. And then I'd go home and my sister and we would play church. And I would basically steal his sermons and preach what he preached. And so I have many good sermons when I was 12, 13 that basically were his.
Right.
And so, so my dad, he was a lover of language, loved language, man. Yeah.
So you're Frederick Douglass Haynes the third.
Yeah.
So your great-grandfather.
Yeah.
What was his name and the radical nature of naming his son Frederick Douglass?
So get this. My grandfather is born at the turn of the last century in Summers County, West Virginia. Age of 4, his parents are dead. He's orphaned at the age of 4. So his sister and his aunt raised him. And all they did was call him Bubba. You know, that was his nickname, Bubba. He never had a name. 9 years of age, he goes to school for the first time, and they ask him his name. On the spot, he says, Frederick Douglass.
Wow.
His sister had been reading to him My Bondage and My Freedom. And so when the teacher says, what's your name? He can't say Bubba. Class will laugh. And so he says Frederick Douglass. So he named himself. On the spot. And that became his name. So for me, the power is he named himself and then set the stage naming his son, who named his grandson. But again, for me, it's crazy that in 1909, 1910, you know, and again, Frederick Douglass had died only, a decade or so before.
Right.
And he has the sense of self to name himself and then live it out. He's pastor in Third Baptist in San Francisco, hosting Paul Robeson, hosting W.E.B. Du Bois. Amos Brown showed me a picture of Du Bois speaking from the pulpit of Third Baptist Church. Josephine Baker. You know, your audience knows, Robeson, Du Bois, Baker, at that time.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, but the country hated them.
Right.
They were not welcome in this country. When my grandfather was saying, you're welcome at Third Baptist. He hosted NAACP National Convention, Martin Luther King Jr. My daughter found in the California Historical Society correspondence with my grandfather challenging FDR, challenging Eisenhower. And so he took that name and lived it. And so I'm blessed because he named himself, and I'm still reaping the fruit of him naming himself.
Now, have you thought about writing a piece on your grandfather and your father?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially to begin with that story. Because how do you, at the age of 9, you know, have the presence of mind to say, I'm Frederick Douglass. That's who I am. And then to live that kind of life.
And so you go from your grandfather, your father, both at Third Baptist. So the audience knows Third Baptist is a storied, amazing, prophetic ministry in the Bay Area. If you are anyone in San Francisco knows Third Baptist for the work that your family has done. And then you make your way to Bishop College. Now, I've heard stories about Bishop and the baptism of Bishop.
They're all true.
There's a lot of but there's a cadre of people who come from Bishop. I think one of the first times I had an experience with Bishop, I called her my big sister, my aunt, Dr. Carolyn Knight.
Oh, man.
who was a Bishopite.
God. Without a doubt.
And then, of course, meeting all of these other people after that. What was it about Bishop that produced people who were committed to the gospel?
Man, thank you for that question. I'm in a PhD program Frank Thomas leads at Christian Theological Seminary. He allowed me to do a class on the pedagogy of Bishop College. And so I created my own piece, and I interviewed Carolyn Knight, Ralph West, Freddie Clark, all the greats, Jeffrey Johnson. And here's what they came up with that I thought, I began with the proposition there was something we were taught. Even, and Carolyn Knight said this, she said, maybe it was in the water because we did get baptized. Whenever the storm, whenever a flash flood happened in Dallas, there was a creek at the school that would like the Jordan, overflow. And Doc, we knew that if you were a freshman preacher or it looked like you were going to preach, you were going to get kidnapped and baptized that night. And here it is. In the name of the great bishop preachers of the past. I got baptized in the name of Manuel Scott, Fred Sampson, Caesar Clark, and I mean, they kidnapped me, took me to the water. So I thought maybe that was it. To a person, all of them who I interviewed said, even laypersons said, no. There was a culture at Bishop that nurtured preaching so that you not only received the gospel, but there was a sense of excellence you were exposed to that said, that's what preaching is. And so we had the L.K. Williams Ministers Institute, Religious Emphasis Week, every Friday chapel. And if there was a great preacher in town, they were going to be at Bishop College in chapel on Friday. And so I heard all the greats from Charles Adams to William Augustus Jones, again, Carolyn Knight, all the greats. And as a young student, I'm hearing this great preaching. That's what I want to aspire to. And what Carter Wood said, you become what you behold. And so I think there was an atmosphere, a culture that was created by Harry S. Wright, by Milton K. Curry. And then to find out that the culture went way beyond years I was thinking about. There was a preacher, Sutton Griggs. You would love Sutton Griggs. Sutton Griggs, Bishop College graduate, like 1891. And Du Bois said that Sutton Griggs was the greatest preacher he had ever heard. And that Sutton Griggs, because he was combining the spiritual with the social. And he was downright radical with it. I mean, Du Bois said he was fearless in his preaching. L.K. Williams comes out of Bishop College. And so you're talking about decades where that school creates a climate, a culture of preaching excellence. And so I think it was a preaching culture that we had at Bishop.
So we go from Bay Area to Bishop College.
Yeah.
And then you move into seminary.
Yeah.
And the seminary, you've been immersed in Black religiosity, in Black spirituality. And then you move into a seminary that is outside of Black pedagogy.
My God.
How did you keep from becoming, how should I say it, enslaved by a pedagogy, by a theological framework that was hostile to Blackness?
Yeah. And it was hard. It was very hard. As a matter of fact, I quit a whole lot. There were days I left class and said, I'm not going back to this. I did not feel at home. I felt at times attacked. I sat in class one day, a class called Biblical Backgrounds, and the teacher was explaining Egypt, and a white girl raised her hand and said, what color were the Egyptians? He looks at me and says they were not black. Wow. And so I can't take it. And so I raised my hand. I said, well, according to historians in that time, they said they had woolly hair and black face and burnt faces. The great Jewish historian says that. So are you saying the Jewish historian is wrong, whose name escapes me right now? And he said, I'm just saying they weren't black. What do I do with that? And I have to say that two things happened that saved me. One, the president at the time of the school, bless his heart, he saw me in the hallway one day and he said, I need you to do this for me. I said, what? Because he could tell I was not feeling like being there. He said, I need you to hang in here. And he said, you treat this education like you would eat fish. You eat the meat, but you throw these bones away because all of this stuff is not going to feed your congregation. This is a white seminary president, who was saying this, Russell Dilday. This is before the hostile takeover by the extreme right. And then your predecessor, Jeremiah Wright, he is staying on me. You stay in school. As I said, I said, Doc, this school ain't gonna help me pastor black people in a black community. He says, well, here's what you do. You're gonna get a double education. Every class you get, you send me the bibliography.
Wow.
I'm gonna send you a bibliography of black authors. When you have a paper, you ask your professor, may I critique? Like I have to do a paper on, for example, Moltmann in a class on the Holy Ghost.
Okay.
He says critique Moltmann through the lens of a womanist scholar.
Wow.
And
wow.
The professor said, okay, if you want to do all of that, that's double work. But that's what I ended up doing, double work. And so I had to read a Jeremiah Wright bibliography and the bibliography of the class in terms of my book reading. That's what I had to do, because I did not want to become, here it is, a white preacher in blackface. And I would have become that because that is what their curriculum is designed to do. It creates white preachers. That's why the president said, you don't take all of this stuff. You just take what you can and then get rid of the rest. Well, what kind of education is that? That was an indictment to me on their education system, because that ain't education if you know you're creating white preachers and you got more than white preachers coming to your school.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, did you start pastoring while you were in seminary, or you just finished?
I started pastoring fresh out of Bishop College.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, my senior year, I was the guest preacher at Friendship West Baptist Church. The founder of the church had me preach, and he passed. He had walking pneumonia the Sunday I preached for him. And then the church, I'm the last one they heard, so they asked me to serve as interim pastor. So I said, okay. And I stayed till I graduated. Graduated, got ready to go to seminary. I had a full ride at Virginia Union. Henry Mitchell never let me forget this. I had a scholarship at Union in New York, and I was on my way to Union, and they voted to call me. And I'm like, in October, and I was getting ready to go in January, and they called me in October, and I've been there ever since, 41 years.
41 years.
Yeah.
41. That is a remarkable story.
Yeah, it's crazy.
My question, as you were sharing all of this, what would you say if you could speak to your younger self today?
Wow.
What would you tell him
Yeah.
that you wish you knew?
Yeah. One, I appreciated education, but I didn't apply myself like I should have. One of the, how can I put it? One of the drawbacks of a bishop education is that Dr. Mangrum, Harry S. Wright, all of them, they made sure that when we graduated, the first year and a half of seminary, we had already studied those works. So I get to seminary and I'm like, I already know this stuff. And I acted like it. And so I cruised through those years in a hostile environment, knowing what I already knew and acting like it. And then they didn't like me anyway. And so I developed some habits that were not healthy. And so I would first tell myself, take your education seriously. What Dr. Wright was doing for me was a gift, and it got me, okay, I better get my mind right in this educational pursuit. The second thing is, I would tell myself, take seriously your personal walk with God. My personal devotion suffered during the explosive years at the church as it was growing like crazy, and I'm all over the place. Okay, God, I'll get to you. I'll read the Bible for a sermon, but not devotionally to speak to me. I'll talk to you on my way to preach, but now every morning I'm gonna catch a few extra winks. I may catch you at night if I don't fall asleep. So taking seriously that walk with God, where Howard Thurman said this, and it fed me in the early years of my ministry, and then I got away from it till I had to get back. He has a meditation, living the outer life from the inward sanctuary in Meditations of the Heart.
Yes.
And that's what it's about. I would say to my younger self, live your outer life from that inward sanctuary. If the sanctuary is right inwardly, the outer, God will handle the consequences. But you got to take care of that inward life. And then the third thing for me is this, and that is that the faith we preach, God's going to make sure you practice it. You ain't just going to preach faith. There will be times when you have to live it so that it's not theoretical, it's real. And I guess the last piece is that Ephesians 3:20. God's going to blow your mind and take you places you didn't plan, you didn't dream about, you didn't ask or pray for. And that's been the crazy part of my ministry, because I thought I had big plans. I thought I had big dreams. And God has done so much more than I could ask or imagine. And I can't take any credit for that. Yeah.
So if you remove preacher, you remove pastor, you remove all of those things, who is Freddie Haynes?
Wow. Child of God who loves people enough to fight for them. Ebony Marshall Turman said this. She said, if you believe in heaven, she said, you're fighting against hell on earth. That's that's who I try to be. I believe in the God of heaven, and I'm a fighter against hell on earth. And on top of that, because of that love I have, I'm a father who is crazy about his daughter, loves his wife, loves my family, and loves to see that for everybody. I want everybody to have that feeling of love that just gives you what you need. And then the last piece I'll say about me, I'm free. I'm free. And I want everybody to be free.
And I have two last questions. There is a considerable amount of black joy when you preach.
Wow.
Did you always have that sense of joy in your preaching?
Wow. That's powerful. Because off the top of my head, yes. I have never thought about it like that. But as I go back to, because I quickly flash back to my initial years of preaching, and that's always been a theme. And I'm not just talking about in terms of content, though it's there, but in terms of just me being me, you know, and I think about that because it hits me powerfully, because my dad died, you know, when I was 14, and I had to find that joy because I lost it. It was gone. And I am convinced that God took me on a journey to joy. And that journey to joy, it just set the stage to fuel. Yeah, I think that's what it fuels me when I'm preparing to preach, as I'm trying to live this thing. And when I'm preaching, I just feel it, man. I feel it. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you for that. And I like the fact that you use black as the adjective modifying that joy, because my blackness unapologetically informs that joy, because that's just us. That's us. I get that from my grandmothers, man. My grandmothers were talking about some joyous women. And as you know, the older we get, we start finding out Their lives were rough and tough.
Yes.
And when I found out what my grandmothers went through, and yet the love that they had, I mean, listen, my grandmothers were the goats of grandmothers, okay? But then there was a joy about them. I mean, just being in their presence, you ain't gonna walk around feeling sad. Sweetie and Grand, that's why the Grace and Doc, when I tell you, I get that from them. I get that from them. And when I started preaching in the early days, they'd come up to me after every sermon, they'd break through the line, grab me, and they're just overjoyed.
Yeah.
So I blame them. I blame them, yeah.
Blaming their grandmother.
I blame my grandmothers, yes, for black joy.
That's a beautiful sentence. So my final question is, I ask this to everyone. If there is a musician, if there is a band, if there is a singer that best describes who you are, who is that person? Who is that band? What is that song? Or a combination of bands. Who would describe, wow, Freddie Haynes musically?
Man, I'm going to do this as a crazy combination. I got to pay some homage to Tupac Shakur. And then marry him to Stevie Wonder. Those two, for me, because both of them socially conscious like crazy, using their platforms for our people to make this world a better place. And then Stevie,
As a song, The Key of Life, or is it Inner Visions?
so you still in it. So I was at concert Stevie gave that was the 40th anniversary of Songs in the Key of Life. He sounded then, 40 years later, like he did on the album 40 years prior. And I have the album to this day. Played it last week. Songs in the Key of Life. I don't even know where to start. But the bottom line is that album, that double album, which was innovative at the time. And so I got to begin with, that gets me with Stevie, because I've tried in my ministry to not allow convention to tell me what to do. I've tried to be innovative. So you asking for just one album, I'm going to give you a double album. And, you know, we did this piece years ago in Dallas, tripped me out. I got invited to close out the early morning show of a hip hop program. And I had been turned down by a gospel station. It was on the AM station. And then this FM K104 said, well, would you close out our hip hop early morning drive? And man, church folk were like, what are you doing on hip hop? They cussing and all that stuff. And here you are. And that helped grow our church, because I had a generation that said, oh, he's hip hop, boy, I'm going to his church. And so that double album that Stevie did, which was not done, it was not done. But that, for me, just the concept of doing what is not done, I've tried to live that. I'm not going to, just because you say it has to be like this, well, why? And, well, if you have not a good answer, I'm going to do it anyway. And we're going to make something that you haven't seen before. And then for me, Tupac, Bay Area, you know, Baltimore, of course, but Bay Area. And for me, Tupac is not so much, well, it's the music and his poetry.
Yes.
They did this piece in L.A., maybe 2 or 3 years ago. 2 years ago, Tupac Museum, pop-up museum. And I got to read The Rose That Grew from Concrete.
Yes.
OM3, OMG. That poem preaches. It's us.
Yes.
It's us. We keep blooming and blossoming in structures we're not supposed to do. And so, and I say this as a testimony, Dad dies at 14. I'm ready to give up on life, but I had too much black joy around me that was nurturing me under the cement. And as a consequence, I feel like God has blessed me to grow, blossom in spite of the concrete circumstances. So that, for me, Tupac's wrote. I love his other stuff, but that poem right there, that's my poem.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Haynes, I want to thank you for being with us for the final word.
My honor.
And I hope in the future that I'll hear some more about Black Joy underneath the concrete.
Bro, you have no idea what you just triggered in me. Thank you. Thank you. That was Black Joy. I love it.
Well, you exemplify it in the way that you preach and the way that your ministry has touched so many people with so much Black joy. Well, I want to thank you all for being with us for the final word. We've had our guest, none other than Dr. Freddie Douglass Haynes III. You can listen to his sermon on our platforms. We'll see you next time. And don't forget, the final word.